So we're going to move on to the next part of the afternoon, where we're going to move into how do we make this real? How might we take it forward and drive this as a model for Herefordshire? So the slide you've got actually on your desk in front of you on the table looks like this. Now, this is what we're here to talk about, and this might just seem like, well, this is the form, and there'll be loads of questions about how it'll work. And I think what the proposal is today is for you to think about your commitment to this, as Hilary outlined. But then we're going to take you through a workshop to talk about the principle of setting up a community chest for Herefordshire, which is a way of us pooling some resource collectively to take some action on prevention and community development together. So we talk about left shift and all of the things that previous speakers have talked about. How are we going to do that? So they need to be invested in. So the idea would be that we develop a mechanism to do that. So there is one chest where we invest in communities to deliver all of these great things. The other part of that is who's going to make this happen. And I think we've got most of the ingredients in this room. And the idea is we would set up a form of a community board, which would represent community leaders, statutory sector leaders, business leaders, to help drive this model forward and shape it. So in the blue there's all sorts of possible things we might invest in. And I want you to just be open-minded, but actually what we'd like to think about is developing community board that can work out what those things are. They're just indicative ideas. But actually, I think what we'd be tasking the board with coming up with is what is the framework of things our communities need, looking at the evidence, looking at what we've already got that needs to be built on, looking at all of our strategies, plans, things that we all must achieve as organisations. What does the community want and need? What can they deliver? And coming up with an outcomes framework that we would use the fund to invest in our communities. So the functions in the green, they're just my ideas. So I'd hope we get to a point at the end of the day where we've pulled that around into something that we could all agree the community board are going to be given the mandate and delegation to work through. So things like how do we find the money? How do we develop the funds in the first place? How do we develop the process around how we passport that money to organisations? How do organisations proportionately apply for money from a community chest, for example? How do we move away from formal commissioning, which is a bit long-winded sometimes, can be expensive? And as Gladys said, lots of tiny organisations don't get a look in with that. And we've got a rich voluntary sector in Herefordshire of about 2,300 groups and organisations, most of which are tiny groups and small micro organisations. There's a part for many of them to play here, and I think the process by which we enable that through this approach needs to be developed and thought through by a group of us together. So the other thing is, how would we measure that this approach is working and is it delivering what communities need? So again, we would want this group of people on a community board to think that through, to work out how we measure the impact and continually develop the way we're doing this. So I think from my point of view, it's really important that we engage and co-produce all of this all of the time with communities themselves. And I think it's fair to say that is quite patchy to date when we develop services and offers. Sometimes we do it well with our communities, other times we just do things that we think they want. I'd like to see us moving that power into communities more so that they can really feel ownership. So I think in developing things together and empowering communities to develop those solutions and tell us what they want and how it should look, I think they're more likely to take more responsibility for their choices and decisions and how they use the offer that they've helped to create. And I think then there's a recognition there at the end that we've invariably invested in the voluntary sector over the years. I think we've had difficult years. There's been some disinvestment in infrastructure for voluntary organisations. What can we do as a group using the fund to make sure we're a strong, thriving organisation with good infrastructure so that our voluntary sector and communities can play this equal partnership role? And what we'll be expecting here is them being at the forefront, leading. So we're looking at a collaborative leadership approach here. So what I would like the groups to do on tables for the next hour or so is to work through the page on the second part of your agenda, which invites you to talk about this model. So how would a community chest work? How would organisations play their part in that? How would a community board take this approach forward and make it real? Are those the right kind of functions that we would want to agree get delegated to this board to drive a community paradigm? Are there other things that you think need to be considered? And I'm sure that it will probably raise more questions than answers, but I want to capture that as well, because I think at the end of today, I'd like us to be in a position where there is a commitment to move this model forward, and that you've identified from statutory and business sector in particular, your leaders that you want to be part of this approach to help develop how this moves forward. I think the community sector, we need to go away and work out how we get the right representation into this. Who is it? We need to engage widely with our voluntary sector and think that through, which we can do through our community partnership and other networks. But I think I've made sure there's enough of you here on all the tables to influence the thinking and decisions around how this works. I think with something as radical as this, we need to think about the fact that everybody will have something they need to gain from this, or something that it needs to tick their box. It needs to meet their strategies, meet their challenges. So that will be the challenge for a community board, to bring it all into one place to work that through over time. Now, Donna kind of said this will take years. We've got a health and wellbeing strategy about to be published, which will be a 10-year strategy. Wouldn't it be amazing if at 10 years' time, we've seen that kind of investment that we're going to have seen, because we've grown an approach, we've grown a mechanism that can work, and we've achieved that. I think what I would say is prevention, early intervention, investment in communities. When we've got really big pressures, that often feels low down on the list. But I would say there is a sense of urgency here. We've got a really acute demand on all of our services, and it feels like we've just bumped from crisis point to crisis point for many people. And unless we start to invest to save and think about doing this approach fairly quickly, I think we'll just see a rising demand that at some point we're just not going to be able to meet. And the people of Herefordshire are going to suffer for that. So I think what I would like to say is it's going beyond empowering communities. I think what we're really wanting communities to do is end up with the power to drive this themselves, but recognising there's a lot for us to do to work out how we play our part in that to get along that journey. So I'm not going to rattle on too much more. So on your table, you have a facilitator and a scribe. And I want you to work through the 4 questions that are on the back of your agenda over the next hour or so. We'll come back after that and we'll hear what each table thinks about the level of commitment that they have and are inspired to have as a result of today to the model. But potentially, what are some of the things we need to think about to drive the work forward to make this happen? Because I think what we would like to see at the end of today is that there's a way forward. We can go away and we can start to make this happen. We can bring the right people together to do the work. We've developed a mandate that we're going to delegate to whoever it is, and Hilary will come back to this at the end. So over to you guys on tables.